All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us for this month's Digging In with TPS-MTSU. Really excited to have you join us today for our April episode. Today we're going to be exploring Tennessee literature. So as we get started, just a few things to keep in mind for those of you who are joining us on the Zoom platform. If you would, please keep your mics muted during the presentation. It just helps us to have a clearer audio. And also, if you would, go ahead and rename yourself in the participant list so we know who we're talking to in the chat on there. If you are joining us via Facebook Live, feel free to be commenting on there as well. We will also be following and monitoring the chat thread on that platform as well. We do want the session to be interactive today. So again, feel free to make use of that chat box if you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves. We would love to know kind of where everyone is joining us from. And also feel free to use the reaction buttons. We aren't doing any polling today, but that is something we sometimes use because we are trying to, of course, make these as fun and engaging as we can in this digital platform. And as with this series, of course, we have a Padlet where you can find all of the resources that will be referenced in today's presentation, as well as all the information from all of the other sessions in the Digging In series that we started last summer. So it's almost been a full year of this, which is a little crazy to think about. So again, you can find all of that there with that link or by using that QR code. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Stacy Graham, who's going to talk to us a little bit about our theme for this month and our special guest today.
Thank you, Kira. All right. I am going to share my screen. Let's see, which one do I want? Okay, so basically we're just looking at our main webpage right now because I want to ask you all a question. And this requires you to drop your answers and your thoughts into the chat box, and my colleagues will monitor the chat box and let me know what y'all are saying. We picked the theme Tennessee literature because we have done a literature newsletter, but it was a long time ago. And so we wanted to revisit something that was more in the English language arts category, but then of course make it also local in scope. So we were like, oh, we've never done Tennessee literature before. And of course, we are always excited to learn new things about our own state ourselves. So it was a good learning experience for us. So let's test your knowledge of Tennessee writers. If you could pop in the chat box a poet or a novelist or an author of any sort that you know who is from Tennessee or lived in Tennessee or is somehow associated with Tennessee at some point. Let's see how many we can get. And I do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of this subject, so if you put a name in and it's wrong, I might not even realize it. Or if you put it in and it's right, I might not know that either. So I'm just going to treat them all like they're right answers. So Kira, what are we getting? You're on mute.
Sorry, we're having some people with some technical issues joining.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we've got Nikki Giovanni, Alex Haley, Cormac McCarthy, Jimmy Chandler, James Agee.
Good.
Wilma Dykeman.
Oh, okay. Well, that's already a really good handful right there. So excellent, everyone. You can pat yourselves on the back. We actually take a closer look at some of those people in this newsletter issue. So you can see I just opened up the newsletter, and of course, the awesome source of the month. We put Dolly Parton here not because she's really associated most with literature, but in a way she kind of is, because here she is at the Library of Congress, which is a library. And she's unveiling her book that she wrote called Coat of Many Colors, based on her song, but she made it into a children's book. And this was also part of the Imagination Library, which brings literature to children for free in Tennessee and across the whole country. And so this is an honorary mention for Tennessee literature status for Dolly Parton. And then of course, there's just the vast body of her songs, which is a type of literature, song lyrics are. We didn't really use that as a category for the rest of our newsletter, but if Bob Dylan can get a Nobel Prize for literature because of his songs, then Dolly Parton can get put on our newsletter because of her songs. But so in the little blurb that we always have, there's a link, just one link, and it's talking about literature. And if you click on it, you will get to the article in the Tennessee Encyclopedia of History and Culture that's on Tennessee literature. So this is a really good overview. And it's, it's actually one of their longer articles. As you can see, it says at the top, I love how they do this, 9 minutes to read. They usually tell you how long they think it'll be, which is helpful. But you would want a nice kind of good sized article about Tennessee literature, and they pack in a lot of different authors, as well as the different movements going through time, talking about Tennessee history. So writers of various kinds, as well as novelists. So the first novel by a Tennessean, Charles W. Todd, somebody that I had never heard of before I read this article. But it also goes on to mention a lot of more well-known people, such as Mary Noailles Murphy, who there's a historical marker for this person in Murfreesboro that I drive by all the time, and she wrote under the name Charles Egbert Craddock. And then, Will Allen Drumgoole, and then just about most of the people that you've already named, and it just goes through the ages, and some people that you'll see featured in the newsletter. So that's kind of a good source for, all right, well, who are the main Tennessee writers that have achieved fame on this level? And then next thing I want to do, I'm going to come back and talk about all of the resources later in this episode. And we are going to feature one of our lesson ideas from one of our graduate student research assistants. But I want to, in a few minutes, turn the program over to our special guest. And that is Jessica Reeves, who is with us today representing Nashville Sites. And so Nashville Sites contributed the feature article for this newsletter. So all of page 2 is devoted to that. And I apologize because I just noticed that I misspelled the word feature on this. So my bad. But yes, and so I'm going to let her tell you more about that. But first, I just want to introduce who Jessica is. I've known her for a long time, actually, because she got her master's degree in public history at Middle Tennessee State University. So I remember that. She did some work with the Center for Historic Preservation while she was here, and some work with the Gore Research Center and the History Department. But now she is a preservationist with the Nashville Metropolitan Historical Commission. And so she's been very involved in the Nashville Sites projects, which started as one of their projects. She, besides her master's in public history, she also has a degree in mass communications and public relations. So I think that all those things really gel very well for what she's doing, which is a lot of community outreach. She works on the Historical Markers program for Metro Historical Commission. And she helps to organize the very excellent African American History and Culture Conference that's held every year in Nashville, that I know that we at the center have been going to for years. So she's done a lot of research with Native American history, both here in Tennessee and out west. She's also done a lot of work on urban history, which is very appropriate for her work in Nashville and on Nashville Sites. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Reeves.
Thanks so much, Stacy, and thank you all so much for being here today. I'm really excited to present to all of you about Nashville sites. I'm going to share my screen here and hopefully do it correctly so I can show my little PowerPoint. Oop, there we go. Push the right button. Yep. All right, and can you guys see that okay?
Yes, we can see that, Jessica.
All right, good. Sorry, I've never presented with slides on Zoom, so I just wanted to make sure. All right, so as Stacy said, my name is Jessica Reeves. I'm the Director of Tours for Nashville Sites. My email is at the bottom of this slide here, reeves@nashvillesites.org. Please feel free to send me an email if you have any questions, after this presentation, questions about Nashville sites, or, about historical markers or Nashville history. I'll talk a little bit more about all the work we do with students a little later on in the presentation. But if you have students who are looking for internships or volunteer credit or anything like that, high school students even, feel free to send me an email, and we have lots of different work. It's not just historical research that we do with Nashville sites. We have lots of opportunities there. So I'm going to divide this. I was told I had about 20 minutes, so we're going to kind of divide half and half between giving you guys an overview of what Nashville Sites is as a resource for you, both for using in your classroom just as research, and then we'll actually get on the website and talk about the lesson plans that we have and how you can use those both for one day in the future when we're all allowed to travel and do field trips, if you want to come and actually take a walking tour around Nashville, or use our virtual option. So we are an online platform. We offer self-guided, credibly curated, mobile-friendly, most importantly, free, thematically based walking tours of Nashville. We are working on some driving tours eventually, but for right now, all of these tours are walking based mainly around the downtown area. And we wanted these to be something accessible to just anyone walking down the street who comes across one of our logos with a QR code. They can jump right in. But we always imagined this as being a scholarly resource, something that students can use, something that educators can use as well. So we try to always build in both the credentials of the people who have written these tours, and then also the sources behind what the research that we did to create the tours, so that you can trust the website when a student cites something from Nashville Sites. You're like, oh, I've never heard of this website. Who knows if they should be using it? We try to make it really abundantly clear from the beginning when you look at it that you can trust the source. So we'll give you a quick rundown of how this all began. 2017 seems so long ago, but that's actually when our executive director, Dr. Mary Ellen Pethel, started the idea for Nashville Sites. She was doing a postdoctoral digital humanities certificate at George Mason University, and Nashville Sites was a class project of hers. And I think that's a goal of all of ours, to start out with this class project or something small that you have to do that can then build and become something much larger than your class or your school, and really become its own thing. So she's reached out to my director at the Metro Historical Commission, Tim Walker, and he looped me in since, as Stacy mentioned, I administer the Historical Markers program, and she was making these walking tours of Nashville based on historical markers. So we all started working together, and then she joined the foundation board, our MHC Foundation, which is just a 501c3 like friends group of the Historical Commission, because we're a government agency and can't fundraise quite like a nonprofit can. So we are technically a project of the Metro Historical Commission Foundation. So from that time, like December 2017, all the way until November of 2019, we walked and we researched and we walked and we wrote and we walked some more. I think I've walked every single street of downtown, all, however many miles and miles and blocks from the river all the way to Union Station, many, many, many times. And we ended up narrating those as well and launching with 21 tours, November 2019. As I mentioned, our educational partners, we couldn't have done the work without them. Many of those were students, high school students, undergraduate students, grad students, and then professors and faculty members across a wide variety of schools around Middle Tennessee. So all of those are really important to us launching in 2019. We're really excited, just take a little break after such a long time of working really hard. Holidays are coming up, winter 2019. And then we're just going to jump right back into it. Spring of 2020, that's going to be our time to shine. We're going to do this huge media push and really get Nashville Sites out there. Well, I'm sure y'all can imagine how that went for us and for everyone else. So much as I mentioned, we have narration for all of our tours. That was really sort of a lower priority for us. We wanted to get the tours out, and narration takes a really long time. We were just going to try to get it in eventually as an accessibility issue. But we noticed how really dangerous it was if you're walking around downtown, looking at your phone, trying to follow directions, trying to cross a busy street, looking at photos. It just was a dangerous situation. So we added in that audio narration, and these two things that you see on the screen, virtual tours and lesson plans, sort of worked the same way. Low priority at first. We knew we eventually wanted to get to those things, but COVID-19 really just pushed us and said, hey, this is where we have to go. So you can access Nashville Sites virtually from any platform, from your desktop, from your laptop, tablet, phone, anything that connects to the internet. It is a website that acts like an app. So you can access it anywhere you are and take those tours. And the same way with the lesson plans, we always envisioned that people would actually be coming downtown, taking tours and utilizing the lesson plans in those ways. And now we really see it more as you can have your students take a tour of downtown Nashville from your classroom, or if we're remote, they can all do it from their couches, and you can lead the lesson via Zoom as we all do now. So I'm going to show you guys a quick video, and then we will go straight into the website. I'll start showing you guys around, and we'll talk about some of the people that are linked in the newsletter for Tennessee literature. So let's see if I can make this do what I want it to do. Right, so hopefully you guys can hear this.
Did you know there's a way to get an up-close look at the history of Nashville without ever leaving your home? Discover Fort Negley and Nashville's Civil War history. Find out about Nashville's key role in the women's suffrage movement. See where Nashville held sit-in protests during the Civil Rights Movement. Learn more about some of Nashville's most iconic buildings, such as the Ryman Auditorium or Bridgestone Arena, home of the Nashville Predators. Or plan your next Instagram photo shoot by taking a tour of Nashville's murals. With Nashville Sites, you can explore over 30 free digital tours and 10 interactive lesson plans for students in grades 4 through 12. Whatever your interest may be, Nashville Sites has a tour for you. Visit us at nashvillesites.org.
All right, so hopefully that worked. The sound really doesn't come through on my end, but hopefully you were able to hear that. And that is actually an animated commercial that was made for us by an undergraduate student at Belmont University. So like I said, it's not just historical research. We can put students to work on pretty much any topic they're interested in. From marketing to animation to photography, or the always necessary research and writing. So we'll do a quick trip around the website, show you guys what it looks like if you were exploring this on your own or wanted to utilize this for different topics within your classes. Just on the homepage here, we have different featured tours. These sort of rotate every few weeks. Sometimes there will be a theme. We just finished Women's History Month, so we had a lot of women's history tours on here. But if there's no theme, just sometimes really popular tours or things that we think people should be reminded of, that they should check out. All of those self-guided, credibly curated things that I showed you guys are on there as well. And then we have a map down here at the bottom. It's not quite as interactive as we'd like it to be. We're still working on that, but you can tap on each of these little dots and it will tell you the name of the tour stop that is there. It won't actually take you any further than that. But for right now, you can at least see, we have hundreds of tour stops all across the city. So there are a couple of places I'll show you. I should probably use this other hand. So we have our tours page here. All of the tours are in alphabetical order. So that's why we try to change it up on the front end. Sorry about that. Since they're in alphabetical order, women's suffrage, women's history highlights, those tend to not get quite as much love since they're all the way at the bottom of the page. But you can see just under the title of each tour, it tells you if you were to actually be downtown walking this tour, about how long would it take you to walk, approximately how many miles is the tour, 1.3, and then how many for the women's suffrage tour, 1.3. And then again, women's suffrage, 7 sites. Most of them are not that short, anywhere from say 12 to 17 is pretty average for us. And we try to keep them all under 2 miles and 2 hours. But of course, if you're sitting at home on your couch, doesn't really matter. You can take as much time or as little time as you want to explore these. We also have photographs associated with the tours themselves and then each stop individually. And so you can just click on the little arrows to go through all of the photographs. And then if you actually click on the photograph itself, it'll take a few moments to load. And you'll see here across the bottom of the screen a caption, and then it tells you where the original photograph came from. So we always try to be really transparent about where our information is coming from, so you can cite those original sources, or you could go to the Library of Congress website and find this photo yourself. And then, as I mentioned, we pivoted quite heavily to virtual options for tours. So you see the Take Tour button there. That's if you're on the ground about to walk around, because it's going to ask, your phone's going to ask you to allow your location to be shared so that your phone can help direct you along this little line. So this is sort of an odd tour because it has a really long, far away last stop that you can drive to if you choose to. We wouldn't encourage you to walk from downtown to the Parthenon. But if you are taking the tour in person, you'll follow along this little blue line to stop at all of these different stops. But if you take tour virtually, it's the exact same experience. You're just missing that very annoying pop-up. Hey, tell me where you are. Hey, let me show you how to get there. Because you could be all the way in, East Tennessee or West Tennessee, or just not downtown, and you don't need that. So once you hit Take Tour, then you begin right with the first stop. You can read, you can listen to the narration, and you just progress. It's pretty self-explanatory, honestly, to just go to the next stop all the way to the end. One thing you will see here at the bottom, this full record and citation, this is again something where we were trying to make this as useful to students and educators as possible. This is sort of like a little encyclopedia entry. It's just like a metadata record that underpins every single tour stop that we have. So we have Union Station here. That is the name of the tour stop. Sorry? All right, so Union Station is the tour stop, and then it's also the name of the metadata, the record underneath here, with just a really quick, 100-word summary about the building, and then some other information about the architect, other people associated with the building, and then you can always go to the relation that's going to take you to an outside website or source where you can learn more. The nice thing about these records is Union Station, for example, is on a lot of tours. Sometimes we're talking about it with women's suffrage. Sometimes we're talking about the architecture. Sometimes we're talking about it more as that sort of pivotal point between when Nashville was a river town and when it became a railroad town, that sort of New South era. So each tour stop will have a different focus, but the record will always be the same. So it's a great research tool for people. And if you notice the copy citation button there, when you click on that, it says copied to clipboard, and then you can just paste it into your paper, and you have an already formatted citation that's ready for you to use. So that's how you use National Sites, but what you guys will really want to look at is our lesson plans. So grades 4 through 8, grades 9 through 12, they cover all the same tours. You can see here civil rights, New South Nashville, downtown Civil War, early Black life and culture, Fort Negley. If you're not familiar with Fort Negley, highly recommend it. It's an amazing tour and an amazing site. Then one that's a little more fun, not quite so strictly a history tour, are public arts and murals. So all the cool, fun murals that you look at when you're walking around downtown. And then women's suffrage, women's history highlights, early history, and Gulch highlights. Those are the same for the 9 through 12 as well. We have a one-pager. It's a PDF. And it's basically telling you all the things that I'm telling you right now. So if you decide you want to use this in your classroom, then you have one page that's going to quickly tell you how to access everything, how to use everything. And the same thing with the lesson plans. You click on them, and we tried to make everything in one place for you. So your standards, your learning objectives, essential questions, additional resources, all linked in there. And then we have some primary source, photographs and things already plugged in to the template. And then basically you just go through each stop, read the tour narrative or listen to the tour narration, and then it gives you some questions to think about and activities to do as you're going through the tours. So that is about it for Nashville Sites. I did want to show you guys one. I don't know that we mentioned this in the featured feature, but since we talked about song lyrics, we did try to give you guys, we don't have a literature tour, and honestly, doing this for you guys this month really made us think that we probably should have one, because there are so many people that we thought of as we were writing. But one of them is actually not the Church Street. Here we go. Oh, it doesn't want to work. It doesn't. It has decided you're not going to get to see this. I'm sorry. All right, well, I'll stop sharing and just tell you that one of the tour stops I would say that you guys should definitely look at, in addition to all of those that are listed in the featured feature, is the Johnny Cash mural, As Long as the Grass Shall Grow. And it's actually a song lyric from his 1964 Bitter Tears album, which is all about like the Red Power movement. So if you're looking for something to go along with that sort of time period and, you know, American Indian movement, then we have a tour stop for that. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free. If we're doing that now, I'm happy to take them. If not, you have my email address. I'd be happy to chat with you guys one-on-one.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. You can ask us questions or drop them in the chat box real quickly. Of course, I think Jessica's going to be able to stay on with us, so you can continue chatting with her in the chat box as well. All right, so she'll be around. So again, you can use the chat box if you guys have questions. And Jessica, thank you so much for joining us and sharing the site. I think there's some really cool things that folks can do with that site, no matter where they are in the state. And I think one of the added benefits of the last year is that now we have all these great virtual resources that we that, you know, otherwise folks who are not inside of Nashville wouldn't have been able to use quite as frequently.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really pushed us to get that virtual option out. And I think it will just really help a lot of people, you know, whether people continue to, you know, not do school in person, or if everybody's back in the classroom, you can all still take a tour and not get all hot and sweaty. So it's perfect.
All right, so at this point, we're going to turn things over to October, who is going to share with us the lesson idea that she did on Nikki Giovanni. So October?
Yes, hi, let me share my screen. Don't mind all the stuff I have going on. Okay, so I did a lesson plan on Nikki Giovanni, and as someone mentioned in the chat earlier, she is from Tennessee and lived in Tennessee for a significant period of her life. She is an African-American poet and literature writer. She has written a couple children's books as well that I think would be cool to use in the classroom. So I should have shared some of those. But Nikki Giovanni was born in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1943. She was actually born Yolanda Cornelia Giovanni, but she got the nickname Nikki when she was a kid. And her family moved throughout Tennessee and to Ohio and Wyoming before she moved back to Knoxville to attend Austin High School. After high school, she went on to go to Fisk University, and she published her first poetry anthology, Black Feeling, Black Talk, in 1968. It became a bestseller really quickly, and she rose to fame for her poetry in the late 60s and early 70s. And since then, she's published over 40 works and won 7 NAACP Image Awards and the Langston Hughes Award for Distinguished Contributions to Arts and Letters. So she's a really awesome Black author and poet. And I thought that what we could do is do a deep dive into one of her poems that I featured in the student packet that I made for y'all. So this is the student packet. To get to this, all you have to do is go to mtsu.edu/TPS, and it's right there on the side where newsletters is, and you can click the April 2021 newsletter. And then our lesson ideas are here on the 3rd page, and the student packet is linked for you right there. And it looks like this. I chose 3 of her poems that I thought would be really great to talk about what it was like to be an African American in the 1970s from her 3 different poetry collections that she came out with in 1970. And the one that we're going to deep dive into today is Adulthood for Claudia, and it came from her second poetry anthology, Black Judgment. So I think I'll read it through just once before we go stanza by stanza, so you can get just an idea of what it looks like as a whole. I used to wonder who'd I'd be when I was a little girl in Indianapolis, Sitting on doctors' porches with post-dawn pre-debs, wondering would my aunt drag me to church Sunday. I was meaningless, and I wondered if life would give me a chance to mean. I found a new life in the withdrawal from all things not like my image. When I was a teenager, I used to sit on the front steps conversing, the gym teacher's son with embryonic eyes, about the essential essence of the universe and other stuff, recognizing the basic powerlessness of me. But then I went to college, where I learned that just because everything I was unreal, I could be real, and not just real through withdrawal into emotional crosshairs or colored bourgeoisie, intellectual pretensions, but from involvement with things approaching reality, I could possibly have a life. So catonic emotions and time-wasting games were replaced with functioning commitments to logic, and necessity and the gray area was slowly darkened into a black thing. For a while, progress was being made along with a certain degree of happiness because I wrote a book and found a love and organized a theater and even gave some lectures on Black history and began to believe all good people could get together and win without bloodshed. Then Hammarskjöld was killed, and Lumbamba was killed, and Diem was killed, and Kennedy was killed, and Malcolm was killed, and Evers was killed, and Schwerner, Chaney, and Goodman were killed, and Louisio was killed, and Stokely fled the country, and Leroy was arrested, and Rapp was arrested, and Pollard, Thompson, and Cooper were killed, and King was killed, and Kennedy was killed. And I sometimes wonder why I didn't become a debutante, sitting on porches, going to church all the time, wondering is my eye makeup on straight, or withdrawn, discoursing on the stars and the moon, instead of a for real Black person who must now feel and inflict pain. So I don't know if you guys want to chat in the chat box about just your general feelings from that first read through. And I can't see the chat box. So if you guys are saying anything, if anyone could read it out loud.
Some of the chats, October, some of the comments are about, especially that roll call portion is very powerful, depressing, showing a lot of loss, especially when she's in this, kind of more optimistic mood, and it's turning it into a very jaded mood pretty quickly. And it's, like how do you maintain that in the face of all of this working against you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. So I'll go back to presenting and we can do it stanza by stanza, as I imagine would be probably the easiest way for your students to understand the poem as a class. Again, there are 3 poems in the student packet, so you can divide the students into groups and they can go at stanza by stanza in a group. But I think when it comes to studying something that, you don't have a definitive answer about what it means, it could be really great for students to chat back and forth about what they think the different parts of the poem can mean. And you can do that in Zoom through breakout rooms, or if you're in person, social distanced groups, smaller groups maybe. But just rereading the first stanza, I used to wonder who I'd be when I was a little girl in Indianapolis, sitting on doctors' porches with post-dawn pre-debs, wondering would my aunt drag me to church Sunday. I was meaningless, and I wondered if life would give me a chance to mean. I found a new image, a new life in the withdrawal from all things not like my image. So for this one, I thought a question you could ask your students is, how is Giovanni describing her childhood here? And I just thinking about this now, but how is she also describing what it means to see herself as African-American during her childhood? How did she see her Blackness during her childhood?
Well, one of the comments was that she isn't really focusing on her Blackness in her childhood. It wasn't really dealing with race. It wasn't, in her face like it will be later. This could be any girl in Knoxville's childhood, just kind of dreaming and wanting something meaningful to happen.
Mm.
And someone also pointed out the simplicity of this opening stanza. It matches the theme of simplicity in her, the innocence of her childhood. And that's, so it's going to change in terms of the structure and the language as she gets older and life gets more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, when I read this, I kind of felt a sense of, she says meaninglessness, and I thought hopelessness, where all she had around her were, people who were of the upper class, as she mentions in the next stanza, who, all they did was worry about going to church and being debutantes and what they would look like. And that obviously didn't connect with her as a child. And, what does that mean when people around you aren't doing what, there's no one around you to inspire you to do something that you would ultimately want to do. And so therefore she sees like, well, if this is all I can do, because it's the only example I have, what does that mean for me? When I don't want to do what everyone else around me is doing. Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. And then the second stanza, when I was a teenager, I used to sit on front steps conversing with gym teacher's son with embryonic eyes about the essential essence of the universe and other stuff, recognizing the basic powerlessness of me. But then I went to college where I learned that just because everything I was unreal, I could be real, and not just real through withdrawal into emotional crosshairs of colored bourgeoisie, intellectual pretenses, but from involvement with things approaching reality. I could possibly have a life. And on the side here, because I don't know if children are going to know these definitions, I thought, again, when you're doing that first pass through, you can ask students words they don't recognize and then define it for them. So I defined two that I figured I didn't know when I was in, middle school. So embryonic is a system, idea, or organization in a rudimentary stage with potential for further development, so incomplete or undeveloped. And then the bourgeoisie is a French term usually used to refer to the middle class and its perceived materialistic values. And so how does that change the meaning? Maybe the gym teacher's son with undeveloped eyes, or maybe even youthful eyes, if they're talking about teenage conversations, unmatured eyes, and then into emotional crosshairs of colored middle class or the colored materialistic. Again, going back to that, how did she see debutantes and people who were in her social class or above her social class, what she should be aspiring to, but doesn't really want to do? And then questions I thought you could ask here are, what about Giovanni was unreal when she's talking about not just because everything I was unreal? And then what is Giovanni's critique of the bourgeoisie? And you can comment on either or both of those questions in the chat box.
Well, part of what becoming real is for her is the process of growing up, for one thing. And I think that's connected to, your sense of self kind of settling in at a certain age. And then she's actually making a contrast between bourgeois things and real life. So, bourgeois pretensions are what is not real. And of course, you go to college and all those things go poof for a while. And so then she really feels like, oh, this is real life. And why did nobody tell me this before?
Yeah, so her kind of political awakening that happens in college is also something I took away from this stanza. And then going on to the next couple stanzas. So catonic emotions and time-wasting games were replaced with functioning commitments to logic and necessity, and the gray area was slowly darkened into a black thing. For a while, progress was being made along with a certain degree of happiness, because I wrote a book and found a love and organized a theater and even gave some lectures on Black history and began to believe all good people could get together and win without bloodshed. And again, I didn't know catonic when I was a child. So defining catonic is related to catatonia, which is a behavioral syndrome marked by the inability to move normally. So having trouble such as staying still, fast or strange movements, and a lack of speech. So I got numb when I found that definition. So all of her numb emotions and time-wasting games were replaced. And then the question that I thought about for these couple stanzas was, what is Giovanni's political ideology at this time in her life?
Okay, so she's hoping that the civil rights movement that she's experiencing and seeing around her now that she's aware will create real change. So this is the hope and change we can believe in. And she's probably surrounded by other people who think the way that she does, so that kind of contributes to that. And it's a sense of purpose.
Yeah. So she follows the civil rights movement, probably nonviolence, as we can probably see by later on who she focuses on when it comes to the losses of the movement. And she, like you guys were saying during the original pass through, is she feeling very positive about her life, the world. She knows it's not all perfect, but she believes it's on the right track and that all good people could get together and win without bloodshed. And then the sad stanza. Then Hammerstrick was killed, and Lumbamba was killed, and Diem was killed, and Kennedy was killed, and Malcolm was killed, and Evers was killed, and Schwerner, Chaney, and Goodman were killed, and Louisa was killed, and Stokely fled the country, and Leroy was arrested, and Rapp was arrested, and Pollard, Thompson, and Cooper were killed, and King was killed, and Kennedy was killed. And I linked to, if you have time in your classes, I linked to individual bios of all the people that she's talking about. So you could divide your class up and have them study one or a group of people when they're connected. If you don't, there is a quicker guide that I was able to find through Genius. They normally do music, but they also have a couple poetry collections on their website. So if you go to that stanza and don't have the time to do a deep dive into each person, this one gives you just quick bios and pictures of who that person was and why they would be important in the 60s and their loss was important and therefore why it was included in Nikki Giovanni's poem. So this is linked for you in the student packet, and then the PDF to my presentation is going to be on our Padlet. So you can also access those larger bios if you want to deep dive into one person or divide your class up and deep dive into all the different people and events that she's talking about during this time. I think this would be a really cool way to learn about events in the 60s that aren't really talked about, because I didn't know a lot of these people until I read this poem either and did the research about who they were and why their death or arrest was important. So I thought this could be another cool thing, sad but cool thing that you could show in your classes as well. And then we kind of already talked about this, but if you want to put into your chat what this stanza makes you feel, I didn't really have like a deep dive question about this particular stanza, but how the stanza feels and the tone that Giovanni is giving to the losses that happened with these people and how this affected her view of the civil rights movement.
Okay, well, this is reflecting the grief, violence, and upheaval of the time, and the, you know, if race wasn't an issue before, it certainly is now. And, you know, all these people were parts of movements and maybe felt that hope, and this is what happened to them. And Suzanne says it makes her want to play strange fruit.
And then the last stanza. And sometimes I wonder why I didn't become a debutante, sitting on porches, going to church all the time, wondering is my eye makeup on straight, or withdrawn, discoursing on the stars and the moon, instead of a for real Black person who must now feel and inflict pain. So then I thought, you know, the end of this poem is a good way to go back to why is this poem called Adulthood? So the title of this poem is called Adulthood. What is the adulthood that Giovanni is talking about? And then how did the losses to the civil rights movement in the 1960s affect Giovanni's political stance? Is she still nonviolent? Does she still believe in the goodness of the civil rights movement? And that's obviously, she hints at that, but doesn't explicitly talk about that. So again, that can be a time where your students can go kind of back and forth on their different perspectives of what she's trying to say.
Well, unfortunately, this reflects some losing the hope for peace, especially when she says that she must now inflict pain, as in like inflicting pain, not just experiencing pain, but inflicting it as part of adulthood, which is sad. But we're also talking in the chat box about how you could make that list longer and turn it into a research project and connect it to modern BLM movement.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things that you could do with this, and how poetry is actually a really good way to reach younger students as well, in like 3rd and 4th grade.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And I do want to just go back to the student packet because again, this isn't the only poem that's in the student packet. So just an honorable mention to the other 2 poems. We have a poem about the funeral of Martin Luther King Jr. So again, another reflective poem on what's happening in Black America and America in general. Martin Luther King's assassination affected a lot of people, no matter your race, and what her personal feelings were about MLK's passing away. And then this one, which I think is a really interesting one that you can kind of juxtapose against the first poem, because I think this poem, Revolutionary Dreams, kind of talks about her change back to a more nonviolent look at politics. I think this one's really cool. So if you have one group of students talking about the first poem, second group of students talking about the 3rd poem, she's talking about 2 very different political views. You know, her journey to militancy and kind of her journey away from militancy. And Recreation is actually her 3rd poetry collection she came out with in 1970. So you can see that change over time from that poem in the 1st collection to this poem in the 3rd collection. But yeah, that's all I had to share with y'all. So I will stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, October. It's nice to be able to take some time with an actual text and really let it breathe with us. I'm just going to spend just a couple minutes showing y'all a few more resources, and then we will wrap up. I'm going to go back to the newsletter, as you saw before. And I want to just point out these 4 different links that we have and what they are in our important links box. The first one is actually an exhibition on the Library of Congress website called Language of the Land, Journeys into Literary America. So this is a great one to use for ELA connections. And if you scroll down, you can even see 2 examples from Tennessee. One of them, Ishmael Reed poem called Chattanooga, and another one is from James Agee's prose poem called Knoxville Summer 1915, which is the subject of our other lesson idea on the newsletter that, that Layla did. And then we have, if you know what the WPA guides are to all the different states that were created during the New Deal, this is from the one for Tennessee. So most of the stuff it talks about is from the 1930s and earlier. So there is that. You have to recognize that limitation chronologically, but it's a really great detailed kind of rundown of writers, and not just writers of like not of fiction, but also journalists and historians and the newspapers, and as well as the novels and poems and everything like that. So if you want to actually do more research into this, that's what that link is about. And then there is, this is from the American Library Association. So this is actually a list of suggested books about Tennessee and Tennesseans with the grade levels that they're appropriate for. So this might be a helpful resource for finding things related to that. And then the last thing that we have linked here is from read.gov at the Library of Congress, which is a really great site. And you can get to, you know, their poetry sites and classic reading lists and that kind of stuff as well. If you just click on Tennessee, then you will get a suggested list as well by Tennessee authors of different books that would be appropriate for students. So those are those resources there. Also quick, just showing you that, yes, if you want to do a deep dive into another poem by a Tennessean, also from Knoxville, this is the James Agee lesson idea. And then the 4 additional writers that we highlight on page 4, T.S. Stribling, who you may or may not have heard of. I hadn't heard of him until some of my coworkers at the Center for Historic Preservation did a heritage development plan for his house in Clifton, Tennessee, which we link to. And our GRA, who's with us today, Layla, was a part of that student project, and she did a lesson plan to go along with that, which we linked to here. But here's a graphic design for the cover of one of his books, and I thought that might be a neat project to do with students, is have them design book covers, because then that could be creative, but they also have to think about how are they going to encapsulate the meaning or the feel of a book in just a picture. And of course, Robert Penn Warren, one of the most famous Tennessee writers that we ran across and that we highlighted, and his connection to the fugitives and the agrarians is well documented. There's lots of resources about that. I won't get into more detail, but I will point out that one of these links will take you to a really great documentary put out by Nashville Public Television about the fugitives, which I watched recently, and it was, Kira recommended it, and it was really good. Alex Haley, of course, famous because he wrote the autobiography, helped write the autobiography of Malcolm X, and Roots. He, of course, has a house in Henning, Tennessee, that's still there. And then Nella Larson was actually at Fisk University for 1 year. And so we get to claim her as a Tennessean, and but she has some really interesting views on race because of her mixed background. And so her book Passing is actually, I didn't know this till Jessica and Mary Beth told me, Passing is coming out as a movie soon with Tessa Thompson in it. And so I've got the novel on my shelf and I'm like, well, I got to read it now before the movie comes out. So lots there for everybody to search in when you have when you are the literary bent. And so, yeah, I'm going to turn it back over to Kira to wrap us up for today.
Thank you, Stacy. And let me just a quick reminder, of course, again, all of the resources for today are on our Padlet, so you can find that there at that address. And right. So, of course, we have been giving away a book at each of our sessions. So October is going to pull up our book giveaway wheel. And so I'm going to turn things over to her so she can bring that up on her screen. We're going to be giving away a copy today of Why Won't You Just Tell Us the Answer? Teaching Historical Thinking for grades 7 through 12. Dwayne is our winner today. Dwayne, if you will, you can either email me or if you want to send me a private message, your mailing address, we'll get that in the mail for you. So a couple quick things as we start to wrap up. We do have a couple of other sessions coming up this month that we hope you guys can join us for. And I'll tell you those dates in just a second. And of course, if you are interested in getting PD credit, please make sure that you fill out our feedback survey. And Stacy will drop the link for that in the chat box. And Stacy or Layla one will, and so you guys can go ahead and fill that out. And if you are viewing this later on our YouTube channel or watching this on Facebook, you can fill out that feedback form too. That is how we generate PD certificates. So just make sure that you fill that out and that you mark that you attended the Tennessee Literature session to get credit for this particular session. As you guys are finding that form and filling that out for me, again, just a couple things we have coming up. We are going to be doing a new program, kind of still playing around with some new kind of options and ideas. So on April the 27th, which is a Tuesday, at 6 p.m. Central Time, we are going to be doing our very first watch party. And we're going to be watching the first episode of the docuseries Amend, which is on Netflix. You don't have to have a Netflix subscription to watch and participate. We're going to be this in a closed group. And so again, just you can register for that. The link for that is on our website under the upcoming events tab. You can find information about that. We're going to be sharing resources and talking about how you can implement pieces of the docuseries in your classroom to help support some of the content standards that you have. So we have that on April the 27th. And then on April the 29th, we are doing a webinar on understanding and unpacking revolutions and thinking about teaching them thematically. So you can find information on our website for that session. And then our next Digging In session will be on May the 13th, and we will be focusing on Native Americans, resistance, and removal. So if that's something that you're interested, we'll have information about how to register for that coming up very soon. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And again, be sure that you filled out your feedback form. If you have any questions, we will stick around here after we stop the recording and be happy to answer those. And again, thank you very much, Jessica, for joining us today and sharing about Nashville sites. All right, thanks everybody.